Hi everyone, hope all are doing great. Today's our topic is HTML ID class, multiple classes, difference between ID and class. Let us start with HTML ID attribute. The HTML ID attribute is used to specify a unique ID for an HTML element. You cannot have more than one element with the same ID in an HTML document. Okay, you cannot have more than one element with the same ID in the HTML document. Using the ID attribute. The ID attribute specifies a unique ID for an HTML element. The value of an ID attribute must be unique within the HTML document. The ID attribute is used to point to a specific style declaration in a style sheet. It is also used by JavaScript to access and manipulate the element with the specific ID. The syntax for ID is write a hash character followed by an ID name, then define the CSS properties within the curly braces. Let us check with one example. Go to Visual Studio Code Editor, add one file by the name id.html. Add the boilerplate code, shift exclamation, press enter. Okay. Inside the head section, change the title as HTML ID attribute. Add the style tag here. Close the style tag. Inside the style tag, add the HTML ID as hash my ID. Curly braces, background color. Okay, select any background color from the available options. Then color of the text. Then padding 5 pixels. Text align center. Okay, now go to the body section, add here h1 tag. The HTML ID attribute. Add the paragraph tag here. ID equals to double quotes of ID name. What is the ID name here? My ID. Use the CSS to style an element. Element with the ID. Okay. Then next, save the changes. Control S. Right click, open with live server. See, for the paragraph, the background color is light green and the text color is dark blue. For heading, we did not specify the ID properties. If you want, you can specify here ID equals to double quotes of ID name, my ID. then properties of ID will be applied to H1 heading. Just save the changes, right click, open with live server. See, the properties of ID is applied to both the heading and the paragraph. If you want, you can change the background color, text color, anything according to your wish. Let us copy this example. Control C. Control V. Then next, the ID name is case sensitive. The ID name must contain at least one character, cannot start with a number and must not contain white spaces. Okay, the ID name must start with a character. It cannot start with a number and it should not contain any white spaces between the ID name. HTML class attribute. The HTML class attribute is used to specify a class for an HTML element. Multiple HTML elements can share the same class name. Okay, multiple HTML elements can share the same class name. Using the class attribute. The class attribute is often used to point to a class name in a style sheet. It can also be used by a JavaScript to access and manipulate elements with a specific class name. The syntax for class. To create a class, write a dot character followed by a class name, then define the CSS properties within a curly braces. Okay, class name will start with dot character followed by the class name. Okay, let us check with an example. Go to Visual Studio Code Editor. Okay, here just change the name as class name, or else we'll delete this code. Dot city. Okay, class name will start with dot city. Here you can specify the properties. Background color. Okay, any dark orange. Color of the text. Okay. Then padding. 5 pixels. And border 2 pixel. Solid red. Margin 10 pixel. Okay. Add the div tag here. Class equals to class name. What is the class name here? City. Inside the div, add one H2 heading, London. Okay. Add one paragraph. London is the capital of England. London is the capital of England. Okay. Add one more div tag here. Then specify the class equals to city Then add here H3 heading. Okay. Paris. Add one paragraph tag. Paris is the capital of France. Add the P tag here. Paris is the capital of France. Okay. Save the changes. Control S. Right click, open with live server. See London. These are the two div containers. Okay. Red color, 2 pixels, red color, solid black, red border. Dark orange color background. The color of the text is what? Dark slate blue. If you want, you can change here. Any color, okay. Light green color will take. Just save the changes. Control S. Open with live server. See. Want to change the border as solid black, you can do that. Just remove this. Save the changes. The border will be applied in 2 pixels solid black color border will be applied. This is the example for class attribute. Change here HTML class attribute. Let's copy this example. Control C. Control V. The class attribute can be used on any HTML element. The class name is case sensitive. Multiple classes. HTML element can belong to more than one class. To define multiple classes, separate the class name with a space. For example, div class city space main. Okay, city is the class name and main is the class name. Okay. We are defining two classes in one div container. Let us check with an example. Go to Visual Studio Code Editor, add one more class here, dot main. Okay, dot main. Background color. Light gray. Then color of the text. Color of the text blue. Okay. Here change the, for city class also change the background color as aqua. Okay. Then padding 10 pixels. Okay, border 2 pixels, solid white, margin 10 pixels. Okay. See, this div tag contains class city. Here we'll use main class. There's one more div tag we'll add here. Div. Here we'll use both the classes. Class equals to city main. Okay. Add here h1 heading. This is the largest heading. Okay, we'll add one more class here, dot URL. Okay, here we'll add text align. Center. Okay, here we'll use URL class. Then one more div tag here we'll add. Class equals to double quotes of main URL. Okay. Add the H6 heading here. Okay. This is the smallest heading. Now save the changes. Control S. Open with live server. Solid yellow. Keep yellow border for this. Control S. Save the changes. Open with live server. This is one div container. This is another div container. This is the combination of city and URL class. This is the combination of main and URL class. Here multiple classes. Save the changes. Copy this example. Control C. Control V. This is the example for multiple classes. Difference between class and ID. A class name can be used by multiple HTML elements, while an ID name must only be used by one HTML element within the page. Let us check with an example. Go to Visual Studio Code Editor. Okay. Add one ID tag here. Hash, define one ID. My ID. Okay. Specify the properties of ID. Background color. Light pink. Color of the text. Black. Okay. Border 5 pixel solid blue. Okay, padding 5 pixels, margin 5 pixels. Okay, in the body section, add one div tag. Use the ID property here. ID equals to double quotes of my ID. Okay, add here heading H1. This is the ID attribute. Add one paragraph here. Add lorem text. Go to view, word wrap. What is the difference between ID and class? Class can be used multiple times, whereas ID can be used only single time. Okay, just save the changes. Open with live server. See, this is the ID. 5 pixels, solid blue border, background color light pink, text color black. This is a lorem paragraph. ID can be used a single time, whereas class can be used multiple times. We'll try to add one ID again with the same ID name. ID equals to double quotes of my ID and H1 tag here. ID attribute can be used only once. Just save the changes, Control S, open with live server. See, for this thing, again the ID properties have been not applied. So ID tag can be used only once, whereas class attributes can be used multiple times. ID attribute is used only once in single HTML document. Okay, we'll remove this. Just copy this example as difference between ID and class attribute. Difference between ID and class attribute. Save the changes. Control C. Control V. Important points to be remembered. The ID name is case sensitive. The ID name must contain at least one character, cannot start with number, and must not contain white spaces. The HTML class attribute specifies one or more class name for an element. Classes are used by CSS and JavaScript to select and access specific elements. The class attribute can be used on any HTML element. The class name is case sensitive. Different HTML elements can point to the same class name. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you understood this concept. Please do like, share, and subscribe.